Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Stigma-Free Society's Facebook Live event. My name is Gerry Freisen, also known as a recovering farmer. I am a conflict and stress management specialist working out of Manitoba. Because of my own journey with mental illness, I have a real passion in talking about it because it is in talking with others we can find a path forward for ourselves. You can learn more about me by visiting gerryfriesen.ca. Through this Facebook Live event, I am representing the Stigma-Free Society, which is a Canadian registered charity that aims to reduce stigma of all kinds with a focus on mental health. This event is part of the Rural Mental Wellness Toolkit, an online community-based mental health program that creates access to mental health education and peer support training, as well as practical and relatable resources for those living in rural and agricultural communities. You can find the toolkit at ruralmentalwellness.com, and I'll mention that again later. I am excited today to have the opportunity to chat with Lauren Van Ewyk. Hi, Lauren.
Hey, Gerry, thank you for having me. I am thrilled to be here. I am absolutely thrilled that the Stigma-Free Society and yourself are so passionate about wellness within our industry. So thank you so much.
Well, and it's interesting meeting you, Lauren, because people sometimes ask me why I'm as passionate about this as I am, and I'm never able to fully answer that question. I have no idea, but I know I am, and I've also just in briefly meeting you today realize and understand your passion as well. That's perfect. Before we jump in, I'm just going to give you guys a quick introduction to Lauren. Lauren is an engaging speaker, registered social worker, foster mom, and agricultural mental health advocate. She has appeared in numerous radio, television, and print articles concerning the issues of adoption, foster care, mental wellness, and mental health in the agricultural sector. She and her husband raise sheep in southwestern Ontario. As a founding member and CEO of the National Farmer Mental Health Alliance, Lauren seeks to meet the needs of farmers all across Canada and the US. Again, welcome, Lauren. I think that bio probably doesn't do you justice. There's a number of things in there that you do, and I wish we had the time to discuss all of them and talk about all of them today. But we're going to focus somewhat on the mental health and agricultural piece, of course, which you and I are both involved in.
Absolutely.
So can you begin by telling us what your personal experience has been like living and working in an agricultural community?
Well, thank you. I want to start off by saying in agriculture, I heard somebody say one time that there's 60,000 different farms in Ontario. There's 60,000 different ways to farm, and so I think I come to this place knowing that there's so much that goes into this industry of agriculture and into what I would call the culture, of agriculture. And so my experience is both. I grew up on a small farm. We have definitely never been in the full-time farming industry, although I have dreamt of it numerous times. It's not been something that has been allotted to me, but my husband grew up in Prince Edward Island, and his dad worked as a full-time employee on a potato farm. And I grew up on a small hobby sheep farm. So we have sheep. We have roughly about 120 ewes right now. And so they keep me hopping. And then we have a few other, we sell direct to customer and things like that. So that's kind of been my experience in agriculture. But the real privilege came when I began to notice the impact of mental health in the industry. And it happened probably about 15 years ago now, actually. I was working, at that time, I was working for the Children's Aid Society. And I was working with farmers. And there was a great deal of misunderstanding within the culture and how farmers experienced life versus kind of at that time, the urban impression. So that aside, we kind of fast forward, and what I have found is many farmers are in need of support, don't often know how to access support, and there is still, and again, hence the Stigma-Free Society, there still is that stigma that if we access help, it means we're weak, it means we're a failure. I often talk about identity as farmers, and as farmers, it's like we have tattooed across our forehead the word farmer, and we don't see ourselves outside of that scope. But the reality is as farmers, we're so much more. As people, we're so much more. And so part of the goal in working with farmers is understanding, yeah, it's wonderful to be a farmer. It's a wonderful identity. And there's so much more that you bring to your community and to your family, your fathers and your mothers and your sisters and your, your volunteers and your all of these different pieces that make up who you are.
Yeah.
And so hence working with farmers has been a huge privilege. I've learned so much. Both as a farmer myself and what I brought to it, my own experience of the frustration of being a farmer as a first gen, really, because we didn't have anything kind of handed down to us or anything. And so little things when we were first starting out were just incredibly stressful and very isolating. And so it has given me both, as being a farmer, that kind of lived experience. And that's what the National Farmers Mental Health Alliance is about, is that lived experience integrated with therapy.
Well, and that lived experience is so important. And I think and I certainly know from my dialogue with others, when I've had the opportunity to be able to exchange stories, as it were. And just like you and I were doing before we started here, when you start exchanging stories like this, I always maintain that we learn so much from each other, and it's important to have those conversations. And like you just mentioned, as farmers, often we're isolated, and when we start feeling down or suffering from some of the effects of stress, we isolate ourselves even more, and that certainly doesn't help our mental health at all.
No, and in fact, one of the things we know from chronic stress, and what I see in farmers is, they go for a long period of time with this chronic stress, and then for some farmers, it's a pretty quick flip, right? We function and we persevere and we work and we work and we work, and we're under chronic stress at that time, and then it's a quick flip. And chronic stress leads to feelings of hopelessness and helplessness. Now, I'm actually not saying stress is bad. I'm not saying that. I mean, as farmers, it's inevitable that we will encounter stress, and to think that we won't is naive. It's not a reality. But when we are functioning in this chronic, ongoing, long-term feelings of stress, which many farmers are, like, statistically, we're falling into that category in the 70 percentile mark. Things change in our brain. Things change in our ability to cope. Things change in our relationships because of that. And so it's really important that as farmers, we can come alongside and say, yeah, chronic stress or stress, it's an issue for us. And what can we do to both change our understanding about stress, change how we view it, and also how do we compensate for that stress, and how do we do that effectively? Part of it is building a language. And that's something that when I work with farmers is usually very early on in the relationship, is developing a different language.
And there has to be that awareness piece. And I recall when I started going down that slope, is you're really not sure what's happening. Overwhelming stress affects us in different ways. And so you think, well, maybe there's just something wrong with me physically, and don't understand that link between mental health and physical health. And like you say, you go down that road long enough and suddenly you're at the edge of the abyss and you have no idea what's going on. So building that awareness again through talking about it, like you said, is beneficial.
It is. It absolutely is.
So I mentioned, and you mentioned it too, the National Farmer Mental Health Alliance. It's a relatively new organization that I just learned about not that long ago, when you and I connected on social media, actually. Tell me about that.
Well, the National Farmer Mental Health Alliance, although we're young, we bring to the table all sorts of lived experience, both in agriculture and in therapy. And I'm not sure how or why everything aligned, but this past year, early in 2022, in roughly May, it was formed. And myself, Carrie Pollard, and Libby Ells are the kind of the founding members, or the founding directors, and we have really been privileged to work with a number of organizations already. And we're thrilled with that. We're thrilled because there's a willingness to answer the call. One of the organizations that we have worked with is the Ontario Association of Social Workers. This is an organization of social workers that are committed to ensuring that therapists are getting the support that they need in order to provide the support that's needed for their clients. And so That's just one example of an organization that's really saying, wait a minute, what can we do to support the agriculture community, even if it's from a kind of a different approach, not directly with the farmer, but from a therapist perspective. So we have the privilege of kind of answering the call in 3 different ways. One of them is through direct counseling. So we receive referrals for people who are farmers who are looking for therapy or looking to chat with somebody, I guess is a more effective way of saying it, right? And so then those who have received our training are approved, they then take on that person. And so it's a really direct connection. And I just feel that farmers have said to me, I feel like I can trust you to make sure that this therapist has the understanding that's needed. What I have heard before in the past, sometimes when farmers have gone for therapy, and I really believe that these therapists had the best intentions in mind. It wasn't done deliberately, but without an understanding of the culture and without an understanding of the issues that we face, there's some naivety and some assumptions that are really damaging to the therapeutic relationship. So case in point, somebody lost the family farm, the 5th, 6th generation family farm. They went to see the therapist and the therapist said, I don't get what it's not really that big a deal. Save up some money and buy another farm. And so it was such a, not dismissive, but kind of forced an abrupt door closure for that client because there was a lack of understanding of this individual lost what would be equivalent to a family member for some people.
Yep.
It was absolutely devastating to this individual. So one of the things that we're committed to and that we're able to provide is therapists who have that understanding and that lived experience.
Well, and that's key. And like you and I, again, talked about before, is with our farmer mental wellness program in Manitoba, we were looking for that same thing because anecdotally, of course, we hear stories and even something, and it's interesting just to relate a story of my own. When you mentioned the example you just did, mine was kind of on the opposite end of that spectrum. We had faced significant financial stress for a number of years and just gotten to the point where we wanted to sell. And when I decided to seek out therapy, I went to see a psychologist, and he was just dumbfounded by the fact that I would even consider selling a family farm. And so it wasn't helpful at all. And so it's like you say, what people need, and again, farmers, others, whoever you are, we need someone to help us that has an understanding of the culture or the industry that we're in ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we do. There's just some really unique facets to the community, and there's some really unique aspects. And one of the recent research reports said that farmers really are lacking on the resilience skills. And I actually kind of struggle with that because I think what they're saying is they lack on the mental health, maybe resilience skills, right? Our mental wellness resilience. But farmers are resilient people. You look at what they have faced over the past, hundreds of years, back to the years. And I mean, my goodness, if we look at the past couple of years, PEI potato farmers, had the industry shut. We've had floods, we've had droughts, we've had hurricanes in Eastern Canada. Farmers are incredibly resilient people. The problem isn't the fact that they're not resilient. The problem is that we haven't learned, and I say we because I'm a farmer, I haven't always learned how to take what I've learned as a resilient skill in farming and apply it to my own wellness. And so that's part of the goal of the therapy that we provide. It's not to create something. It's not to say, oh, you're sick, here's what you need to do. It's to say, okay, wait a minute, you have some incredible strengths in this area. What can we do to transition and apply them in this area?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. And it's like you say, some of the stuff, some of these stressors happening in agriculture, it seems to me when I look back to when I grew up on a farm, things were a lot simpler back then, and farming has become a bigger business. It's more complicated. There's a whole lot more going on. There's more in the control of producers. There's more decisions that have to be made. And it almost seems to me that some of these, dare I say, disasters that are happening, and you mentioned some of them. I just talked to the turkey producers in Manitoba here a few weeks ago, and there's this avian flu outbreak and how devastating some of these things are. And it's these big, they're traumatic events for producers, and how they can build the resilience and how they can cope with those things it's huge. And and nobody's cut out to be able to do that by themselves.
No, and I think for so long we have learned to function in isolation. There's many factors that go into that. There's many factors that go into our need to prove ourselves, or our need to, but part of what's also happening is farmers are responsible for feeding a lot of people. The amount of pressure and responsibility we feel is actually growing. And I think sometimes that might be missed in the general population. I don't know. I honestly don't know, but my anticipation or my thinking is that sometimes that's missed, that sense of responsibility, and that's growing. The pressure is growing. In Ontario, we lose 319 acres a day to urban sprawl. 319 acres a day. That's an incredible amount of land that is being taken out of the agricultural production industry. And so farmers are left to produce more on less. We're also left to produce more on less community support in a way. We do have some larger farmers. We have become more isolated in some ways. But beyond that, our whole community structure has changed significantly over the years, right? We don't have the same kind of community support. Now, I'm not trying to say that the farming community is not supportive of one another, because that's not the case. When I have a farmer in my neighborhood and his barn burns, we might not raise the barn altogether, but there's an incredible amount of support that goes up. So we do have an incredible kind of sense of community. But by and large, kind of the day-to-day function and that day-to-day support and those day-to-day relationships are strained. We certainly have multi-generational farms, but those responsibilities have grown, and we're stretched out further and further.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to jump ahead a little bit, Lauren. How, in your opinion or perspective, does mental health overlap with overall health and wellness?
The truth of the matter is, it's this multi-pronged approach. It's kind of like taking a pie and saying, okay, well, only this quarter is really delicious. Well, the entire pie is absolutely scrumptious. We can't have physical health without a mental health. It's actually impossible. I mean, if you want proof of that, you can look to any of the large, very famous athletes that have a tremendous amount of pressure and stress placed upon them. And they say, I need to step away for a period of time. I think there's an example in the Olympics not very long ago, and everybody was all like, oh, so surprised that the gymnast stepped away. And I thought, I was so proud, and I don't know her, and I was so delighted in her ability to say, I need to spend some time for me, because it affects my mental wellness, affects my ability to perform on a physical level. So certainly physical, mental, and the other one is spiritual. Often I think a lot of times it's easy for us to, in our culture, in our world, to kind of dismiss it and set it aside. But honestly, that's a piece that needs to be explored. It looks different for everybody. I'm not saying that everybody needs to adhere to one particular agenda or one particular, a theology or anything like that. But for instance, for some people who say, well, I don't believe in God at all, I say, okay, but tell me about your legacy. Tell me about those attributes that your grandparents and great-grandparents held. Was it a really strong work ethic? And how has that impacted you? Because we have this, invisible string, so to speak, between the generations when it comes to our community, becomes agriculture. And we are a product of some of those who have gone before us. And so we need to celebrate that. So that's another piece of it. We often talk about a 5-pronged approach at the NFMHA, which is, work. What are you doing for work health? Worker education, financial health is another one, because, and that includes succession planning. If you're a farmer and you're listening, let's pay attention to that early on, because we're in the next number of years, between 2011 and 2030, I believe it's 70% of farmland is going to change hands, right? So there's a lot of succession planning pressure. Sorry if I'm getting off track here, but
no, you're not.
some of the other prongs are faith. The other one is relationship. And oftentimes when we talk about relationship, we need to recognize boundaries. Sometimes we think boundaries or fences are just to keep animals in and keep other things out. But the reality is sometimes it forces people on the other side of the fence to get resourceful. So boundaries are really important. They are to protect you, but they're also to put into place some of those barriers that makes the other person do what they need to do to get well as well. So relationships, finances, health, and the other piece was spirituality as well.
Yeah. No, and that makes a lot of sense. And one of the things that I talk a lot about with producers is that link, and you kind of alluded to it, but that link between, and I said before that as farmers, we have to make more and more decisions on a daily, annual basis because things are always changing, and how overwhelming stress and an extension to that, even anxiety and perhaps the start of depression, influences our way of making decisions, and how we make poor decisions if we're not in the right mental space. And so there's that incredibly important link that people also have to be aware of. And when you talk about financial, that financial prong, certainly that would fit into that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's right. Absolutely. Chronic stress actually does impact the brain. Now, I don't know if a lot of people realize it, but there's this thing called the blood-brain barrier, and it's what prevents junk from going into your brain, for lack of a better term. And when we're under chronic stress, it gets leaky, and inflammatory proteins cross into our brain. Inflammatory proteins is effectively saying, oh, you've got a sore in your brain and we need to rush in and try and fix it. And that's not intended place for those type of proteins. And so it impacts our ability to make decision. It impacts our ability to kind of weigh the pros and the cons and to get resourceful. And so it's, again, I'm not against stress, but we have to change how we view it, and we have to have the support and the skills to address it.
Yeah. So, and I think you've talked a lot about this already, Lauren, but perhaps it's more a matter of summarizing. But what unique mental health challenges do farmers and folks living in agricultural communities face?
So one of the big things that farmers face is the issues, right? The issues that cause stress, the issues that farmers face. Sometimes in urban populations, whether you're seeing a therapist in an urban area or you're talking with other people, they kind of believe that farmers work twice a year, in the spring and in the fall. Yeah. And things are all skittles and sunshine because they get to dig in the dirt and kind of do whatever they want. And that is just not the reality. So the issues they face, whether it's weather or commodity prices, are so much beyond their control. That's definitely one of the issues that farmers are facing. One of the other things that farmers are facing in general is this disconnect with some of the general population. I mean, years ago in 1931, 1 in 5 farmers or 1 in 5 people were farmers. And now it's something like 1 in 53. And I might have the stats wrong there, but I think you can understand what I'm saying. It's almost like a 10-fold difference in the change of a connection to the land. And so there's a growing sense of, I'm just not understood, I'm not respected. And we feel that from multiple facets. One of them, of course, is animal activism. That's one. I mean, today I dropped off some livestock, and I was sitting there and thinking about the amount of pressure. This farmer in front of me came to me. He said, "You got to stay on the good side of this inspector." And I thought, wow, and sure enough, I could hear him say, "No, ma'am. Yes, ma'am." He was really working to make sure that he didn't do anything that would hurt this inspector. So a lot of times we just don't understand some of those issues that farmers are facing, but that growing disconnect between the consumer and the producer is, again, one of those issues.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So you're working on supports for farmers. We in Manitoba there's other organizations that are, but what kind of supports currently exist for farmers when it comes to their mental health?
Well, overall, I do say it's better to speak to anyone rather than no one. I think as farmers, our tendency is to get that old-fashioned rug up, sweep it, and really hope it just disappears. And that's just not effective, folks. There's no miracle that our stuff just disappears. And just so everybody on this call recognizes, we all have stuff. I'll say that again. We all have stuff. There isn't one person walking around this earth that doesn't have something. And so you're not alone, number one. Number two, it doesn't just go away without some work. And farmers aren't afraid of work. We're really not, we work really, really hard. And so you, as a farmer, if you're thinking about, do I need to talk to somebody, you're actually already prepared for it in some ways because of the industry that you have, slaved in or worked and dedicated your time and life to. But what's out there? So our organization is a three-pronged approach. We provide direct therapy to people who are looking for therapy. We have training for therapists. So whether anybody can take the training. We've had some people who are just really invested in mental health that wanted to take the training, and they have done that. So, but it is geared for more therapists who are providing individual counseling. But again, anybody can take it. And the third prong approach is we work with companies all across Canada and the US actually to ensure that they are providing the support they need. So for instance, there's a company called Milk Movement. They provide services to those farmers that are involved with their organization, such as some webinars, such as some information through articles and social media, that sort of thing. And so we partner with them to ensure that they're able to provide those services well from a well-informed approach.
Yeah. So Lauren, and while I think of it, I should ask this at the end probably, but while I think of it, where can people that are hearing you and want to learn more about your organization, where can they find you?
Well, the easiest way is probably through our website, which is www.nfmha, so National Farmers Mental Health Alliance, nfmha.ca. Okay. That's probably the easiest way to contact us. And there is a contact list there that you can submit your information and contact us. And we're happy to engage and have those conversations.
Yeah, perfect. So, and maybe you answered this, but what can farmers do to support their mental health now?
One of the things that you can do to support not only your mental health, but other people's mental health is have those conversations. Like, it's actually okay for you to check in with people and say, hey, I know your farm's doing really well, but how are you doing? Right? How's your relationship doing? And you might get that fine approach. Everybody we talk about are the closed-ended questions or open-ended questions. And people say, well, closed-ended questions end in yes or no. And I always say, and fine. Because if somebody can answer fine to your question, it's a closed-ended question. You want to use open-ended. So in your conversation, say, hey, tell me about how things are going. Right? Help me understand how's your mental health going.
Neighbors helping neighbors.
Yeah. And it's really more powerful than we give it credit for. It really is. It's a sense of community, and when we grow that community, we are all better off for it. And so it's simply starting those conversations.
Yeah. And I mean, something, and again, it was tough for me to learn, but I'm talking to many others as well, as a farmer, I may feel that I'm experiencing something and I may feel like I'm alone. But when we actually start talking to others, we find out we're not alone.
We're not alone. Absolutely. We are not alone. And the strength of our community, like the strength of our culture, is that in and of itself. We are not alone. We may be fewer in number across Canada, but we're not alone. And if my seeder isn't working, I have no trouble calling my neighbor and saying, hey, can you come help me with the seeder? I have a lot of trouble calling my neighbor to say, hey, I'm really feeling down today. Can we have a chat? Yeah. But if we can do that as farmers, if we can bridge that gap, we will. It's just a flowing event after that. If we can start those conversations.
Yeah. Perfect, Lauren. And you know what? It's like I said before, half an hour goes by real quick. We've reached the end of that, but certainly appreciated the conversation with you. Thank you again for joining us today. Your insights into mental health and wellness certainly have resonated with me, as I'm sure they have with our audience. And I think the take-home message today is, again, like we just talked about, you are not alone, and it's okay to be different, and it's okay to need help. And it's totally perfectly fine to reach out for help. And if you are struggling, to make sure you reach out and talk about it. Also, again, please avail yourself of the many resources available in the Rural Mental Wellness Toolkit, which can be found at ruralmentalwellness.com. So thanks again, Lauren. Until next time, stay safe and be well.